Hello, everybody. This is the Data Deserts panel, and we will be talking about how to best close information gaps in minority, rural, and tribal communities.
One of the more well-known in Louisiana when it comes to the environment data gaps is in the chemical corridor, also known as Death Alley or Cancer Alley. That's a really big issue here because a lot of people who are in these river parishes, they say that the industrial facilities that they live near, the pollutants that they release into the air is causing, their neighbors to get cancer. And they have really lived experiences seeing, people of their own family get sick. But our cancer registry in Louisiana doesn't really show the data that would be necessary to back that up. And that's in part because the state agency that runs the cancer database says that in small rural communities, they can't tell us how many people have cancer because it's a HIPAA violation. And obviously, this allows the opportunity for some people to, create doubt about those people's stories. So, I think that data can be great when it does help people, support people's positions, and can make people feel supported and make people feel validated. But sometimes the lack of data can do the opposite.
Gaps I've seen are people that I hear in mainstream media, or just native or non-native, is that there's no data that exists. And I think that's completely, it's not true. I just don't think a lot of people do the research in it or even try to get to a level of understanding or even try to understand of why these exist, but also they're not seeking out the right experts. A lot of journalists tend to seek out, non-native journalists tend to seek out non-native people who are experts in native people, which that's not like the way to go. You have to go to the native experts who are in these fields. And then, there's also, I think, a lack of understanding, a lack of education about federal Indian policy, because a lot of, if you don't understand federal Indian policy, it's hard to understand what systems are in place for Native people and Indigenous communities, and to know how, and that will lead you to the data and at least help you gain the context and understanding the data and the gaps in it as well. And there's also, just with, I think there's a lack of trust too, in Indigenous communities, so that you have to build trust not only with Native journalists and also tribal leaders, but also with the communities themselves. Because oftentimes people, there's this whole movement about data sovereignty and tribes owning the data that they want, but it's really hard to do that when there's a lack of trust or a lack of rapport that's built over time. There's no parachuting in or parachuting out. That's often done with journalism or even in medical research. So it's, having an investment in that community and also giving the data back to Native communities, I think is really crucial and important when it comes to data collection. And there's also just, the exclusion of Native people and Native communities in general, too, when you're looking at national databases, whether it's for COVID-19 or whether it's for census or small, just graphs that's floating around on social media. There's often an other category for Native people, or we're not there at all. There's Black, Latin, Latino, and what other community, and there's other, or maybe there's a little small asterisk saying there's not enough data to present that enough for this graph about Native communities. And I think that's just it's terrible, because that's completely not true.
There are gaps in communication for sure. Gaps in centralization, of course. There's not really, that's something that we've heard on, or I've heard on a local level, is not really having a place for this or a specific way to go about collecting data in communities, say on tribal reservations or within different minority communities. And then, of course, resources, that is a huge one. And I think that's something that's no secret, really, is just there are huge gaps in the resources that are available in terms of how organizations, especially in places like the Navajo Nation, are able to gather, house, and export data and share that data. And I think the last thing is training. I mean, it's on a very local level, but I think that directly connects to resources, as well as not having experienced people to be able to give or to teach other Native people the tools that they need to be able to collect data. So there's gaps in a number of areas, and I think they all lead to communication and definitely resources. And how that looks in terms of long-term, I think that Jourdan alluded to the idea of erasure or data genocide and not having representation as a people. And so Native people are not seen because of that, because of the lack of data, or because of the lack of all of these gaps that exist. And then, of course, I think another huge one, which is where data is directly streamed to, is missed opportunities and funding.
So I guess that's kind of interesting because what I hear is that there's sort of one level of the problem, which is getting certain kinds of old school editors to understand the importance of collecting certain kinds of data that is not being collected, or reporting on certain kinds of things that aren't being reported. And that's kind of one level of the problem, right? Is actually even just making people aware that these things exist. And then there's another sort of, or not only that these problems exist, but that collecting data on certain kinds of communities for the purposes of reporting on issues that affect these communities is something that it matters and is worth doing beyond the scope of like whatever the relationship between the publication and the sort of market it's trying to reach, the readership is trying to reach, or anything like that. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that seems to be a sort of second level of the problem is actually understanding the actual impact of these gaps. So it's not just that we're collecting data for the sake of collecting data, but that the data is actually for what purpose is this
Why
data?
I really like data is because it can really help you be specific about what the issue is. So you can say, if you have the data in front of you, you can say the majority of this, people do this, or the majority of, and you can say that, and you don't have to just say some people, or, you can really quantify it. You can really quantify the issue. I guess another part of it is I just really like being right.